So next up, we have our presentation from Peter Davis. He's a biologist and ecologist at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, as he presents first on navigating change insights into the finalized New York State Freshwater Wetlands Regulations, followed by another presentation on a spotlight on managing invasive species to protect salamanders in the coastal plains. So welcome, Peter. All right, should be able to do that right there.
Good morning, everybody. As Abby said, my name is Pete Davis. I work in the Region 1 Bureau of Ecosystem Health Office for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Our office primarily regulates freshwater wetlands, regulates and protects freshwater wetlands in Region 1. And recently, as of January 1st of 2025, the Article 24 law, which protects freshwater wetlands, has changed. It's been some significant changes. It is intended to put greater protections on freshwater wetlands. And it's also intended to make the review of permits more centralized, so it's less eyes on it and less people making a determination. So it's more fair across the state. So let's get right into it. So why protect wetlands? So clearly, freshwater wetlands are an important ecosystem. They provide habitat for many species, for many native species. They are great for biodiversity. They provide nurseries, they provide breeding habitat for many amphibians, including the tiger salamander, which is an endangered species in New York State. They also provide homes for other important endangered species, such as blanding turtles and eastern mud turtle, both endangered. They provide one of the most important, as far as civilly, they provide stormwater retention. So, of course, it's very important to protect them. And these are just some events that have happened in the last 2 years where that can be linked to freshwater wetlands. So in 2024, in the Capital District, there was a heat wave. So these are all events that the National Guard had to be activated to respond to. Severe thunderstorms and winds, of course, flooding would be caused. And if the wetlands, if you have robust wetlands that can capture that flooding and maybe prevent a little less, mitigate some of the problems. Then in August of 2024, there was Hurricane Debbie, which affected Western Long Island and New York City and Kingston. The Sterling State Park wildfire that was on, I believe it was southern New York and northern New Jersey. In 2023, the National Guard was mobilized to respond to severe winter weather in Hudson Valley and the Capital District. Wildfires in Orange County, and severe flooding in northeastern New York. And all of these events could be mitigated or are mitigated by healthy freshwater wetlands. And without them, they could have been arguably worse. So here are some of the big changes to the Article 24 Freshwater Wetlands Act. Jurisdiction is no longer tied to maps. So prior to January 1st, 2025, you would go to the New York State DEC regulatory maps, and you would select freshwater wetlands, and these polygons would come up, and that would tell you exactly our boundaries of regulation. Anything outside of those boundaries, we were considered non-regulated wetlands, though they could still be regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. No longer, the maps are gone. A wetland now needs a jurisdictional determination by central office in Albany. They decide on a case-by-case basis whether a wetland is going to be regulated. And this is one of the biggest challenges with this change in the law, and we'll get to that in a moment. We regulate larger wetlands. That's a poor choice of words. We're actually regulating more wetlands. So 12.4 acres is what we have been regulating. As of 2028, we're going to reduce that down to 7.4 acres. The reason that it's 0.4 is because 12.4 acres, I think, is 5 hectares and 7.4 acres is 3 hectares. These sizes were determined in metric and then converted to imperial, so the rest of us can understand it. Regulate the small, and then, so we're going to regulate wetlands of unusual importance. There's a whole list of criteria that will determine if a wetland is unusually important for an area. And if it is, then it doesn't matter what size it is. The law specifically says that a wetland of any size that's of unusual importance will be regulated. So that can be challenging too, because I've had some consultants call me and they say, listen, what happens if I have a 4-foot puddle with a red maple growing in it? Does that make it a regulated wetland if it meets all the rest of unusual important criteria? Again, we have to do that on a case-by-case basis. We have to decide whether we're going to regulate that or not. It's not in this slide, but New York State determines what a wetland is by vegetation. So you have to have 50% facultative. So it has to be facultative to obligate. So if the area has 50% facultative vegetation or better meaning more towards obligate, then we consider it a wetland area. We do back it up with soils and with the presence of hydrology, but the law specifically outlines vegetation. So the wetland classification is 664.5. Oh, so this is about classing. So wetlands are classified from 1 to 4, 1 being the highest classification, 4 being the lowest. We've changed the criteria on what makes something a class 1, class 2, class 3, so forth. Basically, most wetlands now are going to be class 2, with few of them, if they have some additional criteria that make them more important, they'll be class 1. Prior to 2020, so most of these classifications have to be determined in central office. A lot of them haven't been determined yet. Prior to 2025, most wetlands on Long Island were class 1 because we're largely an urban area, and that pushes it into class 1. We had a handful of class 3, very few class 3 wetlands, and then a few class 2 wetlands, but primarily most of our wetlands are class 1. And of course, our regulatory power becomes more strict the higher the class of the wetland. So the old maps were based on a field visit of each site, taking in consideration the wetland type, its benefits to the area, and its distribution and location. What we see here is some old 60s and 70s air photos that were used to draw up our regulatory maps. So on the right-hand side, those are the drawings that were turned into the polygons for the regulatory maps that are no longer being used. And in this, so on the left-hand side, you can see the polygons that were drawn up using those aerial photos. And on the right-hand side, you can see the extent using, so now digital elevation models are used. Maps of soils are being used. All aerials are also being used. There's a lot more than just these aerial photos. So you can see the outlines are extended, and that's the actual extent of some of these wetlands that were used in this particular picture. So you can see we're protecting larger areas. So now we have informational maps. So we do still have maps. You can still go on to the environmental resource mapper. You can choose freshwater wetlands as an option to filter out all the other things. But what you're gonna come up with is polygons that are for informational use only, to give you an idea of where wetlands might be. I can tell you on Long Island, some of those informational maps are short. There are areas where I know there are wetlands that the informational maps aren't extending to, and people are, we hope, not assuming that the wetland there is therefore not protected. But that's why these maps are now informational only. They're no longer meant to be yes or no, black and white. Another important fact to consider with the informational maps. So we're also including, we are going to continue regulating wetlands that we have regulated in the past. So we do couple the informational maps when we're making a decision with the old regulatory maps and say, okay, we regulated that in the past. We're going to continue regulating that going forward. Wetlands of unusual importance. These are the ones, again, once a wetland is identified as unusually important, it doesn't matter its size anymore. It doesn't matter if it's 12.4 acres, 7.4 acres, 2 acres, 1 acre, 100 square feet. It's going to get regulated. And these are the 11 criteria that we are using. Is the wetland found in an urban area? Are there known rare plants growing in that area? Was it previously designated as a wetland of unusual importance? So if it had it before, it continues to be so. Is it in one of the floodways? Previously mapped. Is it habitat for the essential behavior of endangered, threatened, special concern, or species of greatest conservation need? Again, on Long Island, that falls with tiger salamanders, eastern mud turtles. There are also some dragonflies and damselflies that are endangered on Long Island. And if these wetlands are identified as having hosted them before, they will be considered unusually important. Is it in a watershed with significant flooding? Is it a productive vernal pool? The productive vernal pool, the challenge there is they haven't been mapped yet, most of them. For Long Island, we do have maps of where tiger salamanders are breeding. So we're counting those as productive vernal pools. They're already going to fall into protection because they're habitat for the essential behavior of an endangered species. The criteria for productive vernal pools is there have been a few amphibians. I believe it's spotted turtles and wood frogs, and I think there's one more. If there's a certain amount of egg masses being counted during the breeding season, then they're going to count that as a productive vernal pool. Is it a class 1 wetland? Any wetland that's class 1 is unusual important. It doesn't have regional or local significance. And finally, is it significant for protecting the state's water quality? So these first 6 are going to be outlined next. So here is a map of New York State with all the urban areas highlighted. So just to focus in, here's a map of Long Island, and here's the urban area polygons. So any wetland that falls under those polygons is automatically a wetland of unusual importance, and it does not matter how large it is, we're going to regulate it. Now, in the areas that aren't covered by this polygon, it could meet some of the other criteria. Floodways, obviously habitat for endangered species, any of the other 10 criteria could. So my supervisor, Kevin Jennings, he said that about 88% of Long Island, any wetland that falls into about 88% of Long Island will be considered unusually important. This is about 77% of Long Island. So the next, so watersheds with significant flooding, we're using the the U.S. Geology Service has the HUC 12 watersheds. These are the criteria that make this watershed a watershed of significant flooding. It has to have greater than 2% impervious surface, less than 5% water storage in the area, and it needs to be upstream or within 4 kilometers of an urban area. So runoff, holding water, and human risk. Here's the map for that. So here's the map for the first factor, impervious surface greater than 2%. Water storage less than 5%. Finally, within 4 kilometers of an urban area. And you can see this is all 3 factors where they all 3 meet. So again, that gets a decent portion of Long Island, not quite as much as urban areas, but it does fill in a few of those areas that aren't considered urban area, but are in like the Nassau and Western Suffolk area. Productive vernal pools. This is an important one because with not only, so vernal pools, first of all, are a rare ecosystem. They provide great breeding habitat for amphibians because they can't hold fish. So their eggs have greater protection. They don't have to worry about their eggs being predated on. So these haven't been mapped yet, and there's actually a program. I think if you go to, I'll find it later. There is a site for, I think it's vernal pools at dec.gov or dec.ny.gov. So that if you think you've identified a vernal pool, there's a criteria form you can fill out and you could submit to the DEC, and it will help us map them. I also believe that some of the nonprofits are being involved in mapping the vernal pools, and Cornell is also involved in it. So they must have the wetland vegetation. They have to be surveyed. They must be productive. They have to have a stringent egg mass count of these of the species we've chosen. Spotted salamander, wood frogs. Unless it's changed, they do change they have been changing some of the selected species for these. They have to be documented. They must be documented. Usually it's documented through natural heritage, through the state natural heritage. It has to be submitted to the DEC, and then it has to get on the list. Then it becomes a regulated vernal pool and becomes a wetland of unusual importance. And then we'll post it on the website so that it's transparency. So this map with vernal pools and also with nutrient poor wetlands such as fens and bogs, we normally protect the adjacent area. So we protect the water, the freshwater wetland itself, and then we protect 100 feet from its boundary. In the cases of vernal pools, and in the case of nutrient poor wetlands, we can extend that protection to greater than 100 feet on a case-by-case basis. What this graphic is showing is that this vernal pool may be 400 feet from this farm field, and to help prevent encroachment onto the vernal pool, we may extend the adjacent area that we protect to 400 feet, or something that we feel will protect that vernal pool a little more from the activities in the farm field, or maybe encroachment by the farm, nitrogen inputs from fertilizer, things like that. Then, of course, on the other side, if that forest is a state park, which is where most of our vernal pools are found in state parks, we may not say anything because we know that nothing's going to happen to it. We will identify it. We'll say, here's a vernal pool. We'll notify the state park that there's a vernal pool on their property, and it will just be protected because of its where it's located. So those are just the what I just talked about. Individual analysis and environmental conditions are what we use to decide if we're going to extend the adjacent area on a freshwater wetland. So now the transition period. So this is talking about going from 2024 into 2025, implementing these law changes. So we're giving a transition period of 3.5 to 2 years for permits that were considered complete before January 1st of 2025. They have, or they had a final environmental impact statement before January 1st of 2025, a negative declaration for type 1, and unlisted actions by the lead agency. And then finally, if they have site plan approval by the municipality before January 1st, 2025, all these things were going to apply previous requirements rather than the new 2024 regulations, 2025 regulations. So again, extending the adjacent area, we nutrient poor wetlands such as fens and bogs. We can, on a case-by-case basis, decide to extend the adjacent area. Vernal pools known to be productive, again, we can extend the adjacent area. And this is done to preserve and protect that wetland. And as I discussed before, individual analysis of each type of wetland will need to be done to determine if we are going to extend that adjacent area. So here's where the challenge arrives. And this is the jurisdictional determination process. This has changed greatly in 2025. Prior to the law change, the jurisdictional map said whether a property was in jurisdiction of a freshwater wetland. We would just look at the map, say, yes, the property's in jurisdiction. We might go out, do a wetland delineation to determine where it exactly falls on that property and say, we're going to protect this, we're going to protect 100 feet from that. That portion is no longer being done in region. So region 1 doesn't do this. Central office now does the jurisdictional determination. And what is supposed to be done, the way the process is supposed to do is before an application comes to the DEC, the applicant is supposed to fill out a jurisdictional determination or hire a consultant to come and do a jurisdictional determination on their property. Those are the two methods that you could have your property analyzed for jurisdiction. If it goes to Albany, it can take up to 90 days. And right now it's taking about 90 days. I'm getting jurisdictional determinations that I've submitted just about on the 90-day, a little bit before the 90-day. If you go the consultant route, the consultant has a list of criteria. They have to fill out a report, submit to our office. We go through the report. We also have to go to the site to verify. But that could shorten the time period from 3 months to maybe a month. But all of this is supposed to happen before the application is being submitted. This hasn't really sunk into the public yet. The public is still going forward, submitting applications like they have done in the past, looking at the maps online, submitting their application, and then we submit the jurisdictional determination on their behalf, but now they still have to wait 90 days from when we submit it. So that getting that educating the public has been one of the challenges that we've come up against. It seems like slowly people are figuring this out and the transition's beginning. So step 1, just to go through the process, determine if the parcel or property is within Article 24 jurisdiction. To determine if the property is within jurisdiction, they have to determine the extent of the wetlands in the parcel of the property, determine if a project requires Article 24 permit. So the first one is parcel JD. If the wetland is on the property, or if it's not on the property and not within 100 feet of the property is out of jurisdiction. Determine the extent of the wetlands. That's the delineation process. That's when we go to the property, we determine where the wetland boundary is, we mark it with flags, and hopefully those flags will show up on a survey or the plans. And step 3, determine if the project, so there might be wetlands on the property, but they're building the house more than 100 feet away. if that's the case, then it's project NJ, it's out of jurisdiction, the project's out of jurisdiction, even though the property is within jurisdiction. So this is the flow chart. And everything in brown is what the applicant's supposed to do. Everything in green is being done in central office. And then everything in blue, there's two parts. The blue fields are being done within region. So you can see if everything's being done correctly in the order it's supposed to be done, the region doesn't come in until near the end. So the applicant submits the parcel JD. All these green, so central office receives it, then they go through their criteria. They're going to look at aerials, they're going to look at digital elevation models, they're going to look at historical maps. They're going to look at soil maps, and they're going to determine, is the property likely to be in jurisdiction or not? If no, they're going to say it's not in jurisdiction. That's it. Everything's done. The person can go on, the applicant can go on and can do their project without any further comment from the BEH as far as freshwater wetlands are concerned. If it's yes, the applicant will receive a positive. They'll say, yes, your property is within jurisdiction. Then the applicant hires a consultant or contacts the region. So we will come out and delineate wetlands. That's what our stage, once that happens, we will verify the delineation or do the delineation ourselves. That's the point where the applicant is supposed to develop their plans for the project. And then the next step is the region to determine whether the project falls within jurisdiction of the freshwater wetland boundary or not. So this is the challenge. This is where we're trying to educate the public and trying to get them to do this process so that plans don't come to us already finished. And then we're like, you can't do this here because your property has a wetland right there and you want to build your pool right in the wetland or whatever the project happens to be. So this is the online jurisdictional determination. You have to allow pop-ups. And then what you'll need to fill out the form, it's an online form. You're going to click that little button when you get to the page that says online jurisdictional determination form. You're going to need to know the landowner. You're going to need to know the parcel ID, which you can find on either a survey of the property or on the DEC informational. There's an informational map on the DEC that will give you the parcel ID. You need the physical address. You need a contact, both a physical mailing address and an email. You have to identify whether you're a private company or an NGO. Then you need your company name and a shapefile. If you have one, they're helpful. This is just what the form looks like. So who is this request being sent on the behalf of? So that's the third thing you would select. You hit that drop down. The first thing is going to be government agency. That's if I'm doing it. I'll click that and then it'll immediately say, who are you? Like which government agency do you work for? If you're a private company, private landowner, and a real estate professional. So that's just identifying who you are. More options may come up depending on what you select. This is just showing how you can find the parcel. You're going to have to type the parcel address into this field on that form, and it will give you a little arrow. If the arrow's in the wrong place, there is instructions on how to correct it. And then here's the timeline. There's 90 days to provide a parcel JD and also 90 days for a project JD. If the department fails to provide a definitive answer in writing or notification of an extension within 90 days of the recipient of the receipt of a parcel jurisdictional determination, the request must notify us of that failure by certified mail. Once we get that certified mail, we have 10 days to make a determination. 10 business days, that's important too. So on review, the initial consultation, delineation, there's a field meeting and discussion. This all should be taking place before the application is being submitted. Complete the JD, the jurisdictional determination appeal application within 120 days from the initial consultation. And oh, so this is, I'm sorry, this is for if you want an appeal. So we say it is, the applicant says it isn't. So then we'll have a consultation. They have to fill out the appeal application within 120 days of that consultation. And then the acceptable determinations of what we're going to say, all right, we failed in these ways, so we're not going to exert jurisdiction, is if it's missing technical information, incorrect application of regulatory criteria, or incorrect application of the guidance. So Article 24. And we have 60 days to respond. We have 4 types of general permits. Some of them are typical projects, things that happen all the time, such as pools, fences. What's another good one? I can't think of one offhand, but then in urban areas, there's certain things that go on in urban areas that are typical. Resurfacing asphalt roads, stuff like that. Shallow, weedy lakes. So that's something that mostly is going to happen outside of Region 1 off of Long Island. And renewable energy. So if someone wants to put, if an organization wants to put up solar panels, we're working on general permits for those so that they don't have to go through the whole process. They can say, here's this general permit form filled out, ready to go. And the review process should be quicker. Typical process. So repair, replacement, removal of existing structures and facilities. There should be a general permit for that. Construction or modification of various residential, commercial, and industrial or public structures. I have to add that the general permits all haven't been finished yet. We haven't within region, we haven't received them from central office. We haven't been given all of them. Temporary installation of access roads and laydown areas. So there's a construction site that needs to go near a wetland. So they need to drive back and forth. Cutting of trees and vegetation, especially there is, I want to say it's ash. There's some tree upstate that I think it is ash trees, so that they can quickly get these applications out for the removal of ash trees that have been killed by ash borer. Drilling test wells and routine beach maintenance and replenishment areas under DEC jurisdiction. Public comment period for this is over. So do you guys have any questions on all that? I know that was kind of dry. Sure.
Beginning, you were speaking about vernal.
Sure.
2 types of vegetation that define vernal.
No, there's not 2 types of vegetation. It's just it has to meet the vegetation criteria. So in New York, so when we're going to regulate a freshwater wetland in New York State at the state level, vegetation is if I go there and it has all the hydrology and all the soils, like I do an auger pull and I pull up and the soil is a wetland soil and there's nothing but red oaks around, it's not a wetland. But if it's all plethora or all high bush blueberry or all any of the red maples, black tupelo, these are all things we see that if it's 50% or better, so composition of the vegetation is 50% facultative. So it's okay. So the range goes from, and this is just for wetland determination of a plant. The range goes from upland, which means it's obligate upland. It can only grow in an upland. Oaks are kind of a good, some oaks are like that. Then you have facultative upland, which means that it's mainly prefers to be an upland habitat, but you once in a while can find it in wetland habitat. Facultative means it can be found in either. So sweet pepper bush is an excellent example of facultative plant. So you can find, but sweet pepper bush primarily, especially on Long Island, when you find clethra, it is around a wetland. It doesn't usually infiltrate the forest very well. It gets outcompeted. But it is facultative. If you cut down all the oaks and you gave it the sun and everything it needs, it would just populate that and you'd have upland sweet pepper bush. Then you have fac wet, which means it almost always is found in a wetland. And then you have obligate. So obligate means it has to be in a wetland. A good example of that, obviously, it would be I just had it in my head, but lily pads.
Oh,
You can't grow lily pads in a field. So, yeah, so those are the three criteria that the plant has to meet is FAC or better, which means FAC or closer to obligate. So FAC wet or obligate. Once we've made that determination, we look at the makeup of the vegetative growth. We say, okay, this is mostly tupelos, red maples, and clethra, which is really on Long Island, especially out east. Those are the big ones. Those three. And high bush blueberries, another one all the time. Jewelweed, yeah, we see jewelweed all the time. So those plants, we'll see them. We'll say, okay, it's 90% this plant. Then we'll do soils and we'll look for signs of hydrology, such as water stain. It's just surface water is a sign of hydrology. So we'll do that to back up our argument, but the argument can stop at 50% or better FAC vegetation.
okay, thank you.
Anything else? Luke, your hand was up first.
I got a couple of quick ones.
I'm sure.
Briefly, what areas on Long Island?
Mhm.
Has there been any discussion about like certified delineator program, for example? I know like certified arborists.
Yeah.
It just seems to me like anyone could go out for JP and like delineated wetland instead of having the proper training.
Yeah, we have that discussion in office all the time in ecosystem health. But so most of us do it, get our certification through Professor Lozito and at Cobleskill. Yes, he's the one who we mostly go through the training. I know a lot of people do Tyner's training. But the state, I don't believe that at this point the state has any recognized certification.
Verbal word. So I know one of the criteria is that we need to find egg masses or survey, a certain time of year.
Mhm.
Here on site, and we can find what clearly seems like it's like a little.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Right.
How should that be classified?
So there's a form, and I was having trouble finding the page when I wanted to. So this isn't my presentation. This is a presentation that we've been giving. Mainly, so there's been new guidance that we've been getting, but we can't release all of that guidance to the public yet. So this is the presentation that has met all the, this is how we can communicate these changes. So I was looking for that vernal pool page. And I kind of found it, and I wanted to make a slide for it, but then I saved over the one that had the slide in it. But there is a vernal pool page on the DEC website, and I think there is a link to the form. And I think the form goes to Natural Heritage. Natural Heritage is the one who identifies the vernal pool and puts it on maps. And then I think that's the process.
Last one is existing permits before January 1st, 2025, they still go through their original.
So they have to meet those And what was the criteria?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the transition period, here we are. So the wetlands permit had to be complete. So there are some wetland permits that came in December and were given an incomplete. So they don't meet the criteria unless they already have site plan approval by the municipality. So if they had that, then that supersedes the permit. The permit status, I should say. And then the final environmental impact statement, I rarely see any of the things in this category. So maybe our division of permits sees things like this, but I very rarely see any of the negative declarations for type 1 or unlisted actions by lead agency. I don't ever see that. But if those are supplied and then they are dated before January 1st, 2025, and then those are good, then we'll move forward on them using the prior regulations. They won't have to go through the JD process, which is what's slowing permits down right now. Yes. Yeah, Phragmites is a tough one, right? Because if you have Phragmites, you've got 50% or better. In fact, I mean, I've seen, I know a handful of spots where there's frag and it's upland, and there's no doubt that it's upland. And I think in those situations, you might need a DEC personnel to come and look at it. But yes, there's 100% chance places where you have. Catbrier is FAC, and there's areas where it's 50% better or catbrier, and we don't call that wetland. Yeah, I would at least, at the very least, ask our office and let us take a look. A lot of times we can tell by aerials. Right. Yeah.
And it can be a little wet, but it's just,
I know of at least one vernal pool that's no longer a vernal pool, it's just a stand of Phragmites in a ditch in the woods. And there's nothing, it's just, it used to be a very productive tiger salamander pond, but it's gone. Well, that one is still a historic tiger salamander breeding pond. So technically, yes, we regulate it. It's one, and it's very difficult to take those off, to get those delisted, basically taken off the map. It's also in an area where we have tiger salamanders using ponds nearby. So with a tiger salamander pond, we regulate out to 1,000 feet. And that's Article 11. That's a whole different, that's protection of wildlife. And there are productive ponds within 1,000 feet of that stand of Phragmites that I'm talking about. So it doesn't change all that much. It's also in an area where there's no projects going to be happening or anything like that. So it's that area, that particular spot's going to be protected. But yeah, that would be a difficult one. If that were in an area where a project was going to be nearby, we'd have to have a discussion and determine how we want to enforce it, or whether we want to say this isn't there's no likelihood of a take, is what basically we would. And
cold and bread.
right. Yeah, especially if there's wetlands nearby, or if there's something nearby that indicates that it's possible that that's also wetlands. The difficulty with Long Island is everything is urban, right?
You refer to 25A, Wading River there.
Old Pond,
No, it's in Calverton.
Calvin.
I mean, yeah, no, that's, I think it's in the Brookhaven portion. It's Calverton, actually. But, yeah,
I think there's one right by, where, I'm sorry, where LIE, near River
Mhm.
Avenue.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one that's no longer. No longer.
Yeah, yeah, there's, I mean, there's like, there's places that got, when we had that 3-year drought a few years ago, there's a lot of vernal pools got filled in because the Phragmites had the opportunity because there was no water, no standing water to prevent it from moving in. So we did lose some ponds during that time. Any other questions on this before do we want to take a break? Oh, sure, I'm sorry.
The pools for tidal wetland.
Yes, that's a different bureau entirely. So there are tidal wetland, that's Article 25. I don't deal with, that's a different office. So tidal wetlands does their own enforcement. We do, so now one of the criteria for a wetland of unusual importance is if it's a fringe wetland to a tidal wetland, a fringe freshwater wetland to a tidal wetland. That creates it, that means it's unusual importance. Again, that opens up all over Long Island. There's fringe wetlands right along, tidal wetlands all over the place. So, yeah.
Maybe Dawson can, you explain that 10 miles.
Oh, yeah, so it's a property that evaluated, the people living in the area don't really develop, people look. But it backs right up to a salt marsh.
Mhm.
Pretty much just part of the forest. I don't know if there's any, doesn't seem like it. Like plant wise.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Their adjacent area is much larger than ours. I don't want to speak too much for them, but a road cuts off their adjacent area. So if you have a tidal wetland and then you have a road, then their adjacent area extends to the road and then that's it. They're also cut off by the 10-foot contour line. So, I think they regulate out to 500 feet. Typically, I feel like they enforce to 300 feet, but if the 10-foot contour line is somewhere between 300 feet and the wetland, it ends at the 10-foot contour line, what they regulate. Yes, right. That's the other thing. How it has to be. Yeah. That's why I don't want to speak too much for them. They have their own review process.
Pete, I have a question. I'm on the computer.
Sure.
Can you hear me? It kind of goes back to Luke's question about vernal pools. When we're going through the consultant option for a JD, it specifically says that we have to analyze for everything indicated in the standard operating procedures that the Albany office would analyze for. The
Right.
standard operating procedure specifically refers to a list of known productive vernal pools. That list has not been made public. And I know when we traditionally go for information from the Natural Heritage Program, they don't provide specifics, right? You know, if it's a type of salamander pond, they say you're within X feet, X miles, whatever. So if we're attempting to do the consultant option for a parcel JD, how has the Natural Heritage Program been instructed to release that information to consultants? Is there an option to foil that information from the DEC? Typically, I know you wouldn't release sensitive information, but how would we go about?
That's a really good question, because I was just discussing vernal pools with Kevin Jennings yesterday. And so a lot of these vernal pools haven't even been mapped yet. Again, with Long Island, we're fortunate that tiger salamander breeding ponds are, and often I know with tiger salamander breeding ponds, we do release the specific location when it directly impacts a project so that, and typically we do it with the consultants. And mainly this is to protect the species and also the vernal pools and stuff like that. Tiger salamanders are under pressure of being collected. So we typically, or natural heritage typically doesn't release it to the public where these habitats are located. Just in general. Again, like you said, they typically say, yes, you're within regulatory area of tiger salamander ponds. So so in my experience, we have released specifics on tiger salamander ponds when it directly impacts a project to that applicant or their consultant. I haven't had many applications come with this vernal pool condition. And again, on Long Island, it's either a tiger salamander pond or most of our vernal pools are located within parks. So they're already in protected areas. So I don't have much experience with it. And I haven't been given any direction personally from central office or even from Kevin that says, this is what we're doing and this is how. But my understanding is that the vernal pool maps aren't complete. The other part of that is that there is, now that we're protecting vernal pools, we're making the effort of finding them and putting them on maps. So we're having, I know CTUC is involved with locating vernal pools on Long Island and I think in New York City, and filling out the forms to get them mapped and get them onto a natural heritage layer of the GIS. I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer, but if you want to send Abby or Cassidy your contact information, I can discuss this with Kevin and see if he has a better answer for that.
Sure,
Yeah,
that would be great.
Yeah, because that's a great question, and it's something that's going to come up. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Short one. Two people from different perspectives are applying for regulation of what could be a vernal pond, the same vernal pond. So I'm asking because George Turner and I may both have submitted requests.
Yeah. So those requests, I think they go to natural heritage, and then I think central office for us, for the DEC, is the first to be notified. That's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know how natural heritage does their reviews on things like that, but they might have a filter that's like, okay, that we've already had this application come in for that area. That it?
Change your mind.
All right, yeah. Well,
Are there any other questions online? You can put them in the chat and we can get back to that too. Now for fun stuff.
yeah, this one's a little more fun. How are we doing on time?
I think we're okay on time considering we had the cancellation of the other one, so take your time. 'Cause that's the right presentation, right?
This is it, yeah. So this one may be a little short, or if you guys have a lot of questions, or we can make it longer, but so habitat improvement of a New York State endangered species, specifically removing Phragmites from a known productive breeding pond for tiger salamanders. This is just my favorite picture of a tiger salamander that I've ever taken. So I use it a lot in many of my presentations. So we'll do a short life history of the tiger salamander. It's the largest terrestrial salamander in New York, only mud puppies and the other one gets really big. What's the other one's name? Yeah, hellbenders. Didn't think of it. These guys can reach over 12 inches in length. That's including its tail. They're a black, robust-bodied salamander covered in irregular yellowish tan blotches that give it its name, tiger salamander, and it has a long keeled tail. The tail tends to be more keeled, more flattened in males than females. Most of the years, tiger salamanders are fossorial. They inhabit burrows that either they dig or that other usually burrowing mammals have dug. And that's where they are most of the year and why most people don't see them. In late winter, early spring, and I mean sometimes February, like early February, if it's warm enough and it's wet enough, they'll emerge to migrate to their breeding ponds. This is when most people will encounter them. These pools are typically vernal pools that receive direct sunlight, so they have very little forest canopy over them. Their egg masses are typically attached to vegetation around 12 to 18 inches in depth. This depth helps regulate the temperature and exposure to sunlight. Now, a brief life history of Phragmites australis, one of our favorite plants. Invasive Phragmites is an invasive wetland grass that grows in large, dense reed beds, crowding out native wetland vegetation to form massive monocultures. Phragmites reproduces both through wind dispersal of seeds and vegetation reproduction through the rhizomes. These rhizomes can also quickly reroot if you fragment them and transport them to a new area. So you can easily, if you break it up and dig it out and you put that soil somewhere, you may suddenly get a new stand of Phragmites in that area. So its threats. So Phragmites has lots of threats, as we just discussed. I don't know how to get rid of that. There we go. Boop. Oops.
That's us responding to the comment.
Oh, it's okay. Oh, did I?
You're good.
Okay. So we discussed in that life history narrative I just had obviously some of the threats that Phragmites presents is crowding out of native vegetation, creating these huge monocultures. The density of Phragmites bed often creates a difficulty for native like ducks and stuff to infiltrate and nest where they typically would nest. But specifically for the vernal breeding pools for tiger salamanders, one of the big threats that it presents is the increase of accumulation of sediment. This is both done because of its density. It traps sediments coming in from floodwaters going into the vernal pool. But it's a seasonal deposition of its dead leaves and its stalks build up in the bed of the vernal pool of the wetland and begin to fill it in. And I've seen, we discussed earlier, I've seen wetlands that are completely filled in and all it is a stand of Phragmites in the middle of the woods. And of course, because tiger salamanders like nice sunny vernal pools, Phragmites typically likes to grow in it. Phragmites also alters the hydroperiod of the vernal pools through its high evapotranspiration rate. It lowers water levels that result from this decrease in the lower water levels that increase in these decreased water. All right, let me try over. The lower water levels that result from this decrease the available area for the tiger salamanders to breed in. It also decreases the depth of the ponds, and the tiger salamanders, again, they want to lay their egg masses about 12 to 18 inches deep. And if you have a pond that's now only 8 inches deep, their egg masses get exposed to more sunlight and often become unviable. The high density of Phragmites stands also may reduce the availability for tiger salamanders to attach their egg masses. So the typical vegetation that they would attach their egg masses to, because of the nearness of another reed, their egg masses are rather large and they may inhibit their ability to for choice of area to lay their egg masses. Additional ecosystem threats caused by Phragmites, the reduction of the vegetative biodiversity, alteration of water temperatures, alteration of the soil chemistry. Phragmites has a high uptake of soil nutrients and it sequesters them and makes them unavailable for use for other organisms in the area that would use them typically, which is one of the reasons why it crowds out native plants, because the native plants don't have these nutrients available to them. The dense Phragmites stands may present a barrier to the migration of the tiger salamanders. So specifically in the ponds we're about to discuss, I did do some pit trapping and I found that the tiger salamanders tend to come from an upland habitat, which I assumed they were going to come from based on the layout of the area. And that area basically had a wall of Phragmites. So it's possible that it may inhibit or slow down their ability to access the pond. So benefits of treating it, of removing the removing the Phragmites, provides greater breeding opportunity, more open water, increase in native vegetative biodiversity, giving them better choice to attach their egg masses. Or return to the historic hydro period and water depths in the vernal pools, and reduced effort to migration to and from the breeding ponds. So this is our #1 tiger salamander breeding area. It's one that I sort of use as my control. I usually go to these spots and I see what's going on there, and that gives me an idea of what might be happening in tiger salamander ponds that in other areas of Long Island. Everything that is in purple is a Phragmites, or was a Phragmites stand. And the pond that contains the most purple is also the most highly productive of these ponds, historically been the most highly productive of these ponds. There was 21,555 square feet of Phragmites. Oh, and it was treated by GEI. I did mention you. So it's about 0.5 acres was treated. There was also another spot a little further west that we had treated. This was in 2023. Then in the winter of 2025, we hand cut some of the new growth of the Phragmites. Here is a pre-treatment area. So I will say that the pre-treatment area in 2022, so these are both the same area, both shots of the same area. The 2025 was post hand cutting. So I took that picture after we cut it. And I took that picture a little bit early. So there is some growth. You can't really see it in that picture. There was some growth. Really, to do a better comparison, I would need to take a picture later in the season when we expect to see more. The Phragmites achieved its full growth, and then I can get a but it does look much better. I also took it from a different spot, so it makes a nice picture of the lawn. But yeah, that is one of the spots that we that was both treated and hand cut. You can see. Well, so there's a picture of it. That's that same plot in that top right picture, just before the hand cutting. So it was a significant amount of Phragmites. Oh, and that's it. That's the happy salamander that has now access to a now wide open breeding tiger salamander pond. Anybody have any questions concerning this? Yes.
When you're doing the handling of Phragmites, you're removing the stems, and what do you do with them?
So we're removing the stems and we're putting them in a dumpster. Yeah, that's really what we're doing at this point. We may do another treatment of the pond as well. We may do another herbicide treatment. Anything else? I expected more questions on tiger salamanders than Article 24. All right, well, Yeah, that one was quick.